Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Adela, as usual, woke up before the alarm started. No, it wasn't a miracle. She wasn't home in her cozy bed. Gray cement walls surrounded her, a low ceiling above, and not a single window. So now, while the light hadn't turned on in this detested place yet, it was so dark, complete black, pitch black darkness Adela had never seen before. Soon, the room would be flooded with the bright light of the bulb hanging from the ceiling on a long wire, and lively music would pour out from hidden speakers in the corners. For some reason, every time she heard it, Adela thought of summer camps. After the morning alarm, settling onto the rigid cot that served as her bed, Adela would daydream about waking up in the morning and realizing the nightmare was over, that she was back in her room. The soft little couch in the corner, the wallpaper with pink flowers, Adela had chosen them with her mom when her dad decided to renovate her room. Shelves filled with her favorite books and cherished trinkets, shelves on the walls overflowing with soft toys. Adela just couldn't bring herself to get rid of them. The stuffed animals were too cute and reminded her of her childhood. How good it was for her at home. Her mom and dad adored her and tried to make her happy whenever they had a chance. But that didn't lead to Adela growing up spoiled. No, everything was quite the opposite. As she grew older, the girl who received so much love and care tried to make her parents' lives happier and more joyful. She remembered Mom, Dad, how are they doing now? Tears welled up in her eyes. She desperately wanted to hug her parents, hear their voices, and see their smiles. It was terrifying even to imagine what might be happening to them right now, their only daughter gone missing. Were they still searching for her? Or, as Estefanio often said, had they long given up hope and resigned themselves to the fact that their beloved Adela was no longer in this world? They are still young. Probably they've already had another child to replace you, the man who had brought her here liked to repeat, his voice sounding so confident that Adela couldn't help but start to believe what he said. You're no longer needed by them. Believe me, they suffered, shed their tears, and moved on. Time heals, and people adapt to everything. Sometimes Adela tried to argue, but more often she stayed silent. She had long realized that it was unwise to anger Estefanio. He was the one in charge here, and her life depended on him. And that was terrifying. How long had she been in this place? It's hard to say, but definitely not just 1 year. At first, Adela was too shocked by what had happened, couldn't accept it for a long time, and tried to convince herself it was all just a horrible dream. She had no time for keeping track of time. It was only later, once she came to terms with her situation, that Adela started scratching tally marks onto the concrete wall with the edge of an aluminum spoon. She had quite a collection of them now, almost enough to mark 2 years. But it had been a long time before she even began this count, possibly a year or even more. With each passing day, she could feel hope for rescue fading, a growing indifference to what was happening. These changes frightened her. Had she really resigned herself to the idea that she would spend her entire life in this cramped basement, listening to Estefanio's ramblings and his strange family's chatter? Adela often recalled that fateful day, or rather, night, when she ended up here, replaying various scenarios in her head. Was there a chance to avoid this fate? What should she have done differently? What was her main mistake? Adela lived with her parents in a small provincial town, and the construction college was the only educational institution around. Adela, the only daughter in the family, was beautiful, bright, and worthy of more. Her mother had no doubts her child should receive a university education. Her father, on the one hand, agreed with his wife, but on the other hand, he was afraid of letting his daughter alone on an independent journey at such a young age. How will she live there without us? He asked his wife. A big city, new friends, so much unexplored. And what if she comes across bad guys, and we're not there to protect her? We're not that far away, Adela's mother objected, dreaming of a bright future for her daughter, which she believed was impossible in their small provincial town. She always pushed her child towards a career, wealth, and success. She wanted her daughter to have what she had once dreamed of herself. But how will she manage on her own? You still make her breakfast and put her laundry in the washing machine. She's so naive, like a child. How can she live independently in a rented apartment? You think I'm not worried? But for the sake of our children's happiness, sometimes we need to set aside our parental selfishness. Adela's mother, who had read a lot about parenting and raising teenagers, could always drop an impactful phrase that left her spouse with nothing to argue about. As for Adela herself, of course, she wanted to be in the big city. She loved going there with her parents. Beautiful wide streets, enormous parks and squares, numerous intriguing shops, concert halls, clubs, and stylish buildings. Life there seemed to be in full swing at any time of day, so much was new, unusual, and enticing. Adela dreamed of finding new friends, going to nightclubs, and strolling through the city's alleys. She felt like every day in that city would be filled with exciting events for her. She loved her quiet, cozy town with streets overgrown with tall grass and neighborhoods of old wooden houses, playing with piers in the meadow, and splashing in the river that flowed on the outskirts. It was the perfect place to spend her school years. But Adela was growing up, and she wanted more. She fully supported her mother's idea to continue her education in a big city. The thought of living independently took her breath away. Eventually, her father gave in too. "All right," he said one day, "we decided it. After school, you'll go study in the city. Even if you don't get a scholarship, we have savings, we'll cover the tuition. And we'll rent you an apartment, somewhere closer to the university." Upon hearing the joyful news, Adela rushed to hug her father. She understood perfectly well that sooner or later he would agree with her and her mother. And finally, it happened. Adela's exam scores were average. There was no way she could get into the prestigious university's economics faculty with those grades. But as promised, her father arranged for her to enroll in a paid spot. In July, Adela saw her name on the list of accepted students. She was over the moon. Her dream was about to come true. The remaining vacation days before the start of the academic year were simply wonderful. Adela went on a seaside trip with her parents. On the beach, she felt the interested gazes of men on her. Over the past year, she had finally grown up and stopped looking like an awkward teenager. Surely, there would be a lot of handsome, successful guys at the university. There would be plenty of choices, unlike in their provincial, tiny town. Max used to seem like a prince to Adela, the first guy in the village, as her mom jokingly called him, tall, agile, witty, and handsome. She used to dream of him noticing her. But there was no chance. There were always crowds of admirers around him. And then, after their graduation, he finally asked her to dance at the local club's disco, and Adela felt nothing. In her mind, she was already in the big city, where she'd have much more interesting admirers. During that period, Adela had trouble falling asleep in the evenings. She was constantly thinking about the upcoming changes. They were a bit scary, but more than that, they were exciting. Just think, she was already a student, a fully grown adult. Finally, it was departure day. Her parents drove her to the big city themselves to help her settle into her new place. The apartment her caring father had rented delighted the girl. It was a stylish studio apartment, and it seemed like a designer had worked on the interior. It was bright, spacious, and very modern. Adela immediately felt like a character from the TV series she loved to watch. The windows overlooked a fantastic view of a wide, festive street where a colorful stream of people always flowed slowly. Behind the beautiful houses, the spire of one of the university buildings was visible, the very one Adela was about to attend. The university was within walking distance. It was very convenient. She wouldn't have to rush in a crowded bus in the morning to make it to her classes. She could stay in bed a bit longer. Her dad was really something. He was always taking care of her. Adela's parents spent the night in the apartment with her and went shopping with her in the morning. They needed to buy so many things: bedding, household odds and ends, stationery for studying, and most importantly, new outfits. Adela needed to look appropriate in lectures. Her father spared no expense on dresses, blouses, and skirts. He had always loved indulging his only princess. And her mother, as always, skillfully put together outfits that fit Adela like those on a model in a magazine. After buying everything they needed, the family went to a cafe. Her parents gave her the final instructions, preparing her for serious study. "Please take care of yourself," her mother said as a last word. "We won't be there to take care of you, so you'll have to take responsibility for yourself. But if anything happens, you can always call us," her father immediately added. "No matter what the problem is, whatever it is, even if you feel guilty about something, we'll support you," her mother agreed. "We'll understand everything and help you through it. You can trust us completely." Adela smiled. She truly had wonderful parents. They always listened to her opinions, always considered her interests, never belittled her, and certainly never hit her, as happened in the families of many of her friends. Adela understood perfectly well that she could come to them with any problem. They were her reliable backers, which gave her strength and confidence. And finally, Adela was left alone. Her parents closed the door to the apartment. They would be back in their cozy little apartment tonight, where Adela spent her happy childhood. But something entirely new awaited her. Classes were starting the day after tomorrow. Adela had prepared herself for something significant, yet the university surprised her with its scale. There were wide corridors, labyrinthine stairs, auditoriums with high ceilings and huge windows, and so many people, students, young stylish professors, venerable old professors, a diverse and bustling crowd. On her very first day, Adela found a friend. Celestina had come to study from a village. Unlike Adela, she had managed to get a scholarship. "You're amazing." Adela genuinely praised her. "What else could I do? It was my only chance to escape poverty." Celestina grew up in a large, poor family and always dreamed of a more successful and comfortable life. She put all her effort into studying, understanding that no one would pay for her education. She received a scholarship and a place in the dormitory, and she wasn't about to miss this opportunity. At the university, Celestina soon became one of the top students in her course, thanks to her determination, persistence, and hard work. Adela often copied homework and answers for quizzes from her friend, and she wasn't the only one. Celestina not only excelled in her studies, but also worked as a waitress in a bar in the evenings. "How do you manage to do it all?" Adela wondered. "I don't have a choice. The monthly scholarship isn't enough, and I don't expect any help," the girl shrugged. Next to her new friend, Adela felt like a little girl whose parents still looked after her. In Celestina's life, there wasn't only work and studying. Thanks to her job at the bar, she was the first to hear about all the grand parties. On that fateful evening, a well-known rock band was supposed to perform on stage, and Celestina managed to get a ticket for her friend. As an employee of the establishment, she could attend the event for free. Adela spent the whole day in happy anticipation. She would see the musicians live, whom she had only seen on the TV screen until today. The band's lead singer was the crush of her childhood, rugged and very romantic at the same time. Celestina was really something. After all, without her, life would be much less colorful and interesting. Adela prepared for the evening thoroughly. She wore a miniskirt that showcased her slender, long legs, a fitted top, and vibrant makeup. She decided to leave her wavy blonde hair down. It cascaded beautifully over her shoulders. High platform sandals completed her look. May was in full swing, exams, and then the session would start soon. But for now, it was a happy time to relax and not think about exams. The weather was already sunny. She felt light and cheerful. Adela critically examined herself in the mirror, tucked a couple of unruly strands with a bobby pin, adjusted the straps of her top, slightly adjusted her skirt, and finally smiled at her reflection. She really was a beauty, and Celestina often told her that. Today, Adela agreed with her friend 100%. Who knows, maybe tonight that prince she had been waiting for would appear in her life. Not on a white horse, but perhaps in a black Mercedes. Adela laughed. It really amused her. Well, why not? It was about time Adela found herself a boyfriend. All year she had been studying diligently, poring over textbooks and coursework, rarely attending parties. She simply didn't have the time or energy for them. She hadn't become a straight A student like Celestina, but she was definitely doing well in her group. It was a good start to her studies. Nevertheless, Adela dreamed of romantic relationships. She envied the university couples who sat by the fountain, kissed in the parks, and strolled hand in hand along the fancy streets. Celestina didn't share her view. "I don't have time for boys right now. First comes studying, then a career, and only after that can I think about serious relationships." "Sounds a bit dull," Adela disagreed. Celestina just shrugged. Adela had high hopes for the evening. The bar would be packed tonight. There was a chance that a fateful encounter awaited her. For this reason, Adela dressed to highlight all the advantages of her figure. After all, she was already 18. It was time to experience what it's like to be someone's lover. Otherwise, she would visit her parents during the holidays, and her friends there would have nothing interesting to hear about. Seeing her friend, Celestina smirked. "Tonight, all the guys are yours," she summed up, then led Adela to an empty table and slipped away. She had a lot of work today, and no guest should be left without attention. At first, Adela felt somewhat awkward amidst the crowd. There were people of all ages and builds, school kids who had just left their teens, college students, and even mature guests who seemed older than Adela's parents. Everyone laughed here and there. The crowd was having fun, relaxing, and letting loose. Adela would have liked to be in a company now, but she found herself sitting alone at a table. Celestina only joined her occasionally. She was working today. And then the musicians appeared on stage, and Adela forgot about everything. She sang along to the childhood songs, clapped until her hands hurt, and even joined the crowd in whistling. Heated by the band's impressive performance, she didn't immediately notice the young man who had joined her. He was watching her attentively and smiling. "Miss, you're so beautiful, I think I've fallen in love." Adela was taken aback as it was unexpected, and she looked over the uninvited guest carefully. Not bad looking, cute actually, blue eyes with a spark, a bright smile that created charming dimples on his cheeks. He was dressed stylishly and clearly expensively. Every move exuded self-assurance. "Thank you for the compliment," Adela stammered, feeling herself blush. She mentally scolded herself for this behavior. After all, she had hoped to meet a prince, and here he was. Why did she react so strangely? "I'm Mario," the guy introduced himself. "Adela. What a wonderful name. I don't know anyone else I'd name the same way." "Thank you," Adela mumbled again. But Mario quickly made her forget her embarrassment. He led the conversation casually and freely, cracked jokes at the right moments, shared interesting facts about his life, and asked Adela questions. Soon, it felt like she had known this guy since childhood. Yes, Mario was skilled at making his conversation partners comfortable. Adela, of course, understood that talking about love was premature, but she had clearly piqued Mario's interest. Such a guy noticed her. The girls would be envious when they saw them together. This thought made her behave more openly, although something inside her resisted being so candid with a stranger. When Mario went to the smoking area, Celestina slipped over to the table. "Do you realize he's hitting on you, right?" she asked her friend. "Of course. And is that a bad thing? But it's clear that he's looking for a one-night stand. I see Mario in our bar from time to time. He often leaves with a girl, and then he comes back alone and looks for a new fling. He's a typical playboy, keep that in mind." "It's different with me, for sure," Adela said, brushing it off. "You should have seen how he looks at me with such admiration. He looks at everyone like that. He's an experienced charmer, so be careful. And really, why don't you go home already? Call a cab. The band has finished playing, there's nothing more to catch here." "No way," Adela said, shaking her head in disagreement. "I'm having so much fun for the first time, and you're suggesting I go home." "But at least go easy on the cocktails," Celestina sighed, looking at another glass of sweet drink that Adela was generously treating Mario with. "Okay." About an hour later, Celestina approached Adela's table again and, apologizing to Mario, drew her friend into a conversation. "I'm leaving, my shift's over." "Well, all right. Let's go to the cinema tomorrow. You'll have a day off, right? Let's go. Come with me." "No." "What are you saying?" "I'm having such a great time with Mario. It's so interesting to talk to him. You can exchange phone numbers and talk tomorrow. And now that you've had enough, let's go. You can stay over at my place." But Adela declined. How many times she would later blame herself for that decision. If she had gone with her friend then, nothing bad would have happened to her. But history doesn't tolerate the subjunctive mood. Everything happened the way it did, and now Adela is here, in this cramped basement, deprived of communication with her loved ones. She hasn't seen the sun, clouds, or blue sky for years, and she hasn't felt the fresh breeze on her face. It was uncertain if any of that would ever be in her life, or if she'd have to spend her days in this cursed dungeon. After Celestina left, Mario started behaving more recklessly. He moved closer, put his arm around Adela's shoulder. The speech of the new acquaintance became less coherent, and his gaze clouded. The drinks quickly did their job, turning the pleasant young man into an animal. "Let's go to my place," Mario finally suggested, at that moment using one hand to hold Adela tightly against him. Adela tried to pull away, but the guy just tightened his embrace. She felt how strong his arms were. I should go," Adela mumbled. She was starting to get scared. She was completely alone in the bar. It was deep into the night outside. There was no one to ask for help, and the new acquaintance seemed serious. Mario no longer seemed like a prince to her. She wanted to get away from him. "No, what do you mean, home?" Aggression crept into Mario's voice. "How much have I spent on you today?" "Calculate it, a neat sum just went on cocktails. And now you're going home." "No way, make up for it." Waves of panic and disgust washed over Adela. And why didn't she listen to Celestina? The disappointment felt almost physically painful. Mario seemed so smitten, so decent, and now these words. The girl silently pulled a stack of bills from her purse, everything she had, and handed the money to Mario. "Here, take it, and I need to go home." The guy just smirked. "Naive little fool, I love girls like you. This won't even cover half of the expenses. Get ready, we're going to my place." With these words, Mario pulled Adela away from the table and headed towards the exit. Resisting him was simply impossible. His strong arms held her firmly, and she couldn't even struggle. Adela walked through the hall on weak legs. From the outside, she and Mario probably looked like a couple hugging. Maybe she should have screamed to attract attention. But the music was blasting, people were laughing and chatting, hardly anyone would hear her. And Mario would surely be infuriated by such behavior, and who knew what he might do to her for it. "I need to go to the restroom," Adela said, grabbing onto a straw. Right now, she needed to get away from Mario, even if it meant spending a few minutes outside of his steel embrace. Perhaps she could ask someone for help. "You can wait until we get home," her companion replied grimly. "No, I can't wait. Or do you want me to ruin the interior of your car or the taxi? I don't know where we'll be going." Mario let out a heavy sigh and led the girl to the women's restroom, peered inside, made sure no one was there, and only then pushed Adela into the room, saying, "Hurry up, I'll wait for you near the entrance." Adela locked herself in a stall and caught her breath. It felt like tiny hammers were pounding in her head. How did she end up in this situation? What should she have done now? Maybe stay here and wait until the place closes, until a guard enters? She would surely ask him for help. But surely, Mario would get tired of waiting soon and burst in here. His flimsy lock wouldn't hold him back. Suddenly, Adela felt a light breeze on her back. She turned around. Right under the ceiling was a rectangular partially open window, very narrow, but perhaps Adela could squeeze through if she tried really hard, of course. And she did try. She stood on the toilet seat, reached for the pipe, and pulled herself up on it like on a pull-up bar. Where did she find the strength? Adela had never been particularly sporty. And there it was, the window that could save her life, right in front of her. With great difficulty, she squeezed herself outside, scraping her nails and knees in the process, but that was a small price to pay compared to the freedom she now had. Adela rushed away from the bar. People who had gone outside to smoke were looking at her with surprised glances. She didn't pay attention to the direction, she just wanted to be far away, which meant safe. Adela felt like Mario was chasing her. She kept looking back, but the city's nocturnal streets were quiet and deserted. Her feet stumbled every now and then. It's not easy to run in high-heeled sandals. Finally, Adela thought she had put a safe distance between them. She sat down on the steps of the library and caught her breath. So, she managed to escape. That was good news. But there was bad news too. Her purse was still back there in the bar, with her money, phone, student ID, and many other pleasant and necessary items like makeup items, chewing gum, and other odds and ends. That was not good. First of all, Mario now knows her name and where she studies. This means he could stalk her at the university, though, of course, he probably wouldn't bother. Secondly, and much worse, Adela was left without money. Yes, there wasn't much cash in her wallet, but that wasn't the point. She wouldn't be able to call a taxi, and walking was out of the question given the distance. And it wasn't the distance that scared her, she could have managed that somehow. The most unpleasant part was that her way home led through the industrial zone of a large factory. Even during the day, Adela was cautious about going there, let alone in the middle of the night. Packs of stray dogs, strange groups of people, a vast stretch of emptiness that went on for miles. It was horrifying to even think that she would have to cross this place alone so late at night. But there was no choice. It was also unsafe to stay out on the street all night. Oh, she should have listened to Celestina. The thought, I should have listened to Celestina, would haunt Adela's mind 1,000 times and echo with pain in her heart. How easily she could have avoided becoming a captive. Even staying with Mario would have been a much better decision. But who could have known what Adela's escape from the bar would lead to? Adela forced herself to get up from the steps. Now that she walked more slowly, her mind was clearer. Nothing terrible, she would be home in about 40 minutes. She'd take out the ice cream with nuts from the freezer, sit in front of the TV. But first, of course, she would take a shower, wash away all the anxieties of the evening. And then, as morning approached, she would fall asleep right in front of the flickering screen. Soon, she would be completely safe, and she'd never take such risks again. She would become a better student, immerse herself in her studies. It was enough adventure for her. Thinking in this manner, Adela reached the part of the route that scared her so much, the industrial zone. She stopped. There were quiet, illuminated streets behind her, while here was a completely different world, dark, frightening, and dangerous. But there was still no other way, so Adela resolutely moved forward. Dogs were howling and barking somewhere. She just hoped not to encounter that pack. The wind carried muffled voices and laughter from somewhere. Somewhere close by, it seemed, a cheerful group was hanging out, most likely male, judging by the tone of their voices. Meeting these people was even scarier than facing the dogs. Walking became difficult because the impenetrable darkness obscured the path. Adela stumbled now and then, even fell a couple of times. Oh, how she wished to get out of here already, her home was just within reach. Adela had never felt so lost and vulnerable. If anything happened, she wouldn't even be able to call for help, no one would hear her anyway. A tall, solid fence enclosing the factory grounds stretched on endlessly. And suddenly, she heard the rustling of tires behind her. The beams of headlights illuminated the road. Adela jumped back in fear, pressing her back against the fence. It's a pity there's no shelter nearby. Common sense told her that meeting anyone decent at night in such a place was not a good idea. In the car, there could be anyone, and dealing with her now would be so easy, they'd just push her into the car and take her somewhere. Her heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it could jump out of her chest. For the 100th time that evening, Adela regretted choosing such an outfit: a mini skirt, a crop top, and high platform sandals. And she had put on makeup like a doll, as if she were deliberately asking for trouble. A car, an old one, pulled up next to the girl. She looked at the driver and passengers in fear, then breathed a sigh of relief. Behind the wheel was a middle-aged man, quite ordinary looking, tousled hair, stubble on his cheeks, a plaid shirt like a dad would wear. Next to him, in the passenger seat, was a woman, also very plain, without makeup, and a cheap market dress, on the heavier side. They were a typical couple and didn't differ much from Adela's parents or her classmates' parents. The sight of the third passenger finally reassured the girl, an adolescent girl in a stretched-out t-shirt and jeans, probably their daughter. She was looking at Adela with tired and indifferent eyes. "Miss, what are you doing alone in such a dangerous place at night?" the man asked, rolling down the window. There was genuine concern in his voice. Adela then thought that maybe he imagined his own daughter in her place and wanted to help. "It just happened," Adela mumbled. "I got into trouble. I'm on my way home now, not far left." "Get in, we'll give you a ride," the woman, who had already opened the back door for Adela. "Valeriana, move over." "Of course, get in," the man said. "We'll get you there quickly, who knows what could happen. It's dangerous for a young girl to walk alone in the city at night." Of course, Adela had been told 100 times that you shouldn't get into a car with strangers. But she was so tired, so cold, and she was really scared, she still had to cross the industrial zone. And if the man had been alone, Adela would never have agreed, but there were his wife and their daughter. It was an ordinary family, just like Adela's. They saw her, felt sorry for her, and wanted to help. And Adela made the biggest mistake of her life. She got into that damned car. At first, everything was fine. The man and the woman asked Adela about her life. The girl briefly recounted the incident at the bar. The adults clucked their tongues, scolded Adela a bit, saying she shouldn't have been hanging around such places at her young age. "You see, Valeriana, what life can bring," the man said in a teaching tone to his indifferent daughter. The girl, who looked about 2 years younger than Adela, paid no attention to her father's words. She seemed oddly indifferent, almost like a zombie. Adela thought then that Valeriana must have been very tired and wanted to sleep. That's probably why she seemed so detached. In the car with these pleasant, kind people, Adela felt completely safe. With horror, she looked at the scenes passing by outside the car window: wasteland, protruding rebar. At one point, a pack of dogs blocked the car's path. They barked and growled furiously at the car and followed it for a while. And Adela would have surely encountered them. There would have been no avoiding it. It's terrifying to think how it all could have ended. Suddenly, the girl felt sick, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. It must have been the cocktail she had the night before. The woman turned around and noticed Adela's condition. "Oh, dear, you've turned so pale. Are you okay? Can you stop the car? I think I'm going to be sick." The man obediently parked by the fence. Adela jumped out of the car and ran to the bushes, where she emptied her stomach. She felt a bit embarrassed, but the relief that followed the bout of nausea was too comforting not to enjoy. This was a chance. Another chance to free herself. After all, Adela didn't have to return to the car. She could have thanked these people for the ride and walked the remaining distance on her own. There wasn't much left. But Adela got back in. She returned on her own. On the other hand, maybe she didn't really have a choice back then, Estefanio probably wouldn't have let her go. After all, he was remarkably strong despite his slender build. Adela would come to realize this on many occasions later. "Here, have a drink, it will make you feel better," the man said, handing Adela a bottle of water. The girl eagerly took a few sips. Cool, clean water was all she needed in that moment. When she lost consciousness, she managed to realize that something had been mixed into the water. But it was already too late. Her awareness rapidly faded, with darkness encroaching from all sides. Adela woke up in the basement, which would become her prison for years to come. It was a dreadful, loathsome place. When she woke up, she understood the true meaning of the word despair for the first time. A bright light bulb dangled from the ceiling. Adela was lying on a hard cot, covered with a thin, worn, but clearly clean sheet. Against one wall was a writing desk and a chair, and against another wall was a larger table. Adela noticed a rusty metal bucket in the corner near the door. That was all that was here. "Where am I?" Adela asked, even though she was clearly alone in the room. Fear had turned her limbs into ice. She didn't know where she was or what had happened, but she understood one thing: she was in big trouble, and it was unclear if there was a way out of this nightmare situation. Adela got up from the cot, walked to the door on weak, trembling legs, and pulled the handle. Of course, it was locked. Suddenly, she felt a surge of strength. She furiously pounded the door with her hands and feet. It seemed like with a bit of effort, she could break it, shatter it into pieces, but her palms were getting scraped, and of course, it was all in vain. Finally, exhausted, she slumped to the floor, cupping her head in her hands, and sobbed. Adela had never cried like this before. There was no reason for it. She trembled violently, the sobs shaking her entire body. Strangely, she felt relief after crying. Gradually, her mind cleared, and she began to think again. Eventually, she calmed down completely. She needed to wait. If she had been abducted, and that was most likely the case, then the kidnapper would come soon. Of course, it would be that friendly and attentive man who was the driver. He would explain what was going on. And then Adela would decide what to do next. She lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling, low and unpainted, with fine cracks. And how starkly modern the camera in the corner looked against that background. And they were watching her through it. Adela suddenly waved her hand directly at the camera's convex black eye and even managed to smile. "Feeling better?" A loud male voice came from seemingly all sides. Only then did Adela notice several speakers hanging in the corners of her cell. "Where am I? What do you want? What should I do to be released?" So many questions. "You'll find out everything in due time. My parents can give you money. Not much, of course, we're not a wealthy family. But they'll sell everything they have. Get in touch with them," Adela tried to negotiate. "You're all the same," the man said, sounding disappointed. "You think money solves everything, but I'm not acting for the sake of profit." "Then what?" Adela cried out in desperation. Panic was washing over her in cold waves. If only the kidnapper had wanted money, that would have been at least logical. What was he going to do to her? What fate awaited her? "Calm down, we'll talk," the man said, disconnecting. Like a caged tiger, Adela started pacing from one corner to another. She needed to release the stress. The movement brought some relief, however small. Suddenly, she heard a click. Adela turned her head towards the sound. A small window opened in the door, and female hands pushed a tray with a glass and a plate through. So that's what the strange protrusion on the door was for. The window quickly closed, and the tray remained on the narrow windowsill. "Eat," the voice from the speaker said again. "Leave the empty dishes where the tray is now, Elisa will take them." At first, Adela wasn't even considering touching the food, but then she felt hunger in her stomach, and her thirst was relentless. So, despite her condition, Adela quickly finished the cold, unsweetened porridge and drank the water from the glass with its unpleasant metallic taste. Had they mixed something in again? Or was it due to the old plumbing? Time passed. Nothing else happened, only the tray with the dirty dishes was taken through the window and the door. Adela tried to talk to her captors. They must have heard her. The camera was evidence of that. They were clearly watching, but there was no response. She felt like she was talking to thin air. They didn't communicate with her much. They passed her food and water through the window. Adela used the rusty bucket she noticed upon waking as a makeshift toilet. They took it through a special opening in the door, then returned it empty. They had everything thought out. Initially, Adela tried to call for help. She shouted so much that it felt like her eardrums were about to burst, but to no avail. The kidnappers didn't even try to stop her screams. Adela concluded that calling for help was useless. Either they were holding her in a remote place with no one around for miles, or the basement walls were insulated with soundproofing material. The criminals clearly weren't afraid of her cries. They let her scream as much as she wanted. So time passed, perhaps several days, maybe even a week. Eventually, Adela grew accustomed to her new existence. She spent her days sitting on the cot. To occupy herself, she invented various interesting stories in her head, as if she were mentally showing herself movies. The events in these mental pictures always unfolded against the backdrop of beautiful landscapes, vast fields, seaside coasts, bustling cities. Adela was missing open space. The light of the electric bulb, although very bright, couldn't replace the gentle rays of the sun. The stale air of the basement made her nauseous. Periodically, she would fall into a fitful sleep. She lost track of days and didn't even roughly keep up with the time of day. The light bulb burned continuously under the ceiling, its light becoming tiresome. Increasingly, she wanted to immerse herself in soothing darkness. She asked them to turn off the light, even for a short while, but her request went unanswered. One day, a male voice spoke to her again. "Are you ready for a dialogue now?" Adela felt like screaming, insulting the kidnapper with her final words, and begging for mercy, all at once. With tremendous willpower, she restrained herself. Last time, she bombarded the man with questions, fell into hysterics. And what had she achieved? They didn't talk to her for a long time. No, now she needed to demonstrate an entirely different behavior, pretending to be calm and resigned. Maybe then this man would finally explain to her what was happening. "Yes, let's talk," Adela replied. "I'm ready." Adela didn't expect what happened almost immediately after this short conversation. The door opened, and he entered the room. It was the man in the plaid shirt, just like her father's, the same man who had been driving the car, the seemingly peaceful family man. Now, looking at him, Adela couldn't understand how she could have been so mistaken. The cold gaze of an obviously abnormal person, thin lips pressed together, an unpleasant, terrifying, repulsive look despite his seemingly normal features. Adela recoiled from the visitor, pressed herself against the wall. It was unclear why he was here. "My name is Estefanio," the man introduced himself. Well, quite an imaginative name, Adela thought. "Adela," the girl replied, giving her name in return. "I know a lot about you," the man assured her. At these words, spoken in an insinuating tone, shivers ran down Adela's spine. Of course, she couldn't hold back, even though she understood that it was better to remain silent. An involuntary question burst out of her that had been tormenting her all this time. "Why am I here?" Adela thought that Estefanio would get angry again, but the man just smiled and shook his head, then proceeded to tell his story, sending chills down Adela's spine. She was now completely convinced that she had fallen into the hands of someone unstable. Estefanio, who had once been Antonio, was born into a typical family, a mother, father, grandmother, and a dog. They all lived in a small, two-bedroom apartment that belonged to the boy's maternal grandparents. Money was tight, even though both his mother and father worked a lot. But nobody despaired. Back then, everyone lived like that. At first, everything was normal. Estefanio attended kindergarten, then went to school. However, his peers always seemed to avoid the quiet, contemplative boy for some reason. His parents didn't notice any problems. Both were working day and night shifts at the factory, too preoccupied to worry about their child's socialization. But it was his grandmother who was concerned about her grandson's withdrawn nature. She tried to fix the situation, forcing the boy out onto the street for a few hours, hoping he would make friends out of boredom, and inviting her acquaintances with children over to the house. But all in vain. Little Tony, as he was called, stubbornly refused to connect. And his peers either avoided him at best or teased and bullied him at worst. I was already different back then, Estefanio said, his eyes shining with the realization of his own uniqueness and grandeur. Children felt it, but they didn't understand it, so they feared and avoided me. And I was fine with that. I never liked those noisy and treacherous games that other boys played. Estefanio added that it was around that time, at 7 or 8 years old, that he first heard that voice that was majestic, calm, and powerful. It told him that there were many dirty, wicked people around, corrupting the world with their presence, making it cruel and unjust. Antonio agreed with every word. He himself had seen how wicked those silly children were, the ones his beloved grandmother tried to make him befriend. Once, that voice told me that my name wasn't Antonio, but Estefanio. I tried to explain this to my parents. My mother laughed, and my father got angry. Their reaction angered me a lot. I decided that my time would come, a time for revenge. And for now, I was just a weak, helpless child. The voice told me to wait, to grow stronger, and then it would tell me about the mission assigned to me. It felt good to feel chosen. Since then, the people around me have seemed even more pathetic than before. I reacted calmly to the children's taunts. I knew my time would come. If the parents brushed off their son's strange ideas as rich childhood imagination, attributing everything to a vivid fantasy, his grandmother, who spent a lot of time with the child, grew suspicious. She started to keep a closer eye on her grandson. His conversations with himself particularly worried her. She couldn't have heard that voice, Estefanio explained. So she thought something was wrong with me. Grandmothers tend to panic when it comes to their grandchildren. At first, the voice simply encouraged Estefanio, telling him he was chosen and unique. Then, it started giving him small tasks for practice before the main mission. And Estefanio carried out every order. He uprooted flowers from pots, trampled flower beds in the yard, threw a textbook at the teacher during class, and pushed a classmate down the stairs who teased him more than the others. The girl broke her leg and hit her head, but the cunning voice guided him on how to make it all look like an unfortunate accident. There were many tasks: spilling groceries from the refrigerator onto the floor at night, scratching an offensive message about a neighbor on the apartment wall, loudly screaming in the middle of a store for half an hour, ruining a mattress. Of course, Estefanio asked the voice why he had to do all this, as he ended up getting in trouble for these strange actions. The voice replied that it was meant to strengthen my will and teach me to overcome obstacles and doubts. And the voice was right. At first, the misdeeds were difficult for me, but then they became easier and easier. One day, the voice asked Estefanio to turn the head of his grandmother's canary. The boy didn't particularly like the bird. It annoyed him with its incessant chirping, scattering trash around the cage, while he was very fond of cleanliness. But this request was just too much. The voice explained that as the grown Estefanio was going to undertake a serious mission, there would be times when he would have to be tough and resolute. Kindness would require fists. The boy sighed, gathered his strength, and carried out what seemed to him to be a terrifying order at the time. Of course, the grandmother understood whose handiwork it was and was horrified. Her grandson had long been acting strangely. She told his parents about the problem, but her busy daughter and son-in-law always dismissed it, attributing everything to regular boyish mischief. The grandmother realized that it wasn't so. She had raised many children, seen her daughters and sons' friends grow up, and she understood perfectly well that something was definitely wrong with Antonio. For example, she was worried about the fact that an 8-year-old boy insisted on being called Estefanio. The canary incident became a distressing signal for the elderly woman to take immediate action. She couldn't wait any longer. Antonio urgently needed to be shown to specialists. She took her grandson to the doctor. Tests, analyses, interviews, every aspect of the boy was examined. The verdict was discouraging. The child's condition was deteriorating. And so, the treatment began: pills, injections, and periodic stays in the hospital. Sometimes the therapy led to the voice temporarily quieting down, and that was when Estefanio truly became frightened. He wanted to hear the voice. He found comfort and ease in its guidance on how to behave. The boy realized that the pills were the cause, so he stopped taking them. He pretended to swallow the wretched pills, discreetly throwing them out of the window. Estefanio grew up, with his eccentricities becoming even more noticeable. His peers treated him differently, they avoided him, feared him, and teased him. Teachers strongly recommended transferring the troublesome student, who might engage in eccentric behavior right in the middle of class, to a special school. His parents were ashamed of their son. They had never been particularly close to the boy. His grandmother had taken care of his upbringing from an early age. They were quick to lay the blame on her for Antonio's not turning out right. The mother and father tried to minimize interaction with their defective child as much as possible in their cramped two-bedroom apartment. The grandmother still kept an eye on the boy. It became increasingly difficult for her to predict and prevent the teenager's outbursts. The older Estefanio became, the more often and longer the voice talked with him. One day, he initiated a conversation with the voice about girls. A woman should be quiet, hardworking, and virtuous, the voice proclaimed. But look around, observe your classmates and other girls. What do you see? Estefanio saw growing girls, each of them seeming attractive to him in her own way. He envied the boys who dared to be with these nymphs, joked with them, hugged them, and sometimes even kissed them. Estefanio understood well that these young beauties would never allow him near them, and he grew angry with the girls, with the boys, and with the entire world. These are fallen women, the voice continued. Notice how they dress, how they put on makeup, and how they behave. They do everything to attract men, to capture their thoughts, and to later weave ropes from them. This is a great sin. But they're not entirely hopeless while they're still young. Later, it will be too late to do anything. Now, I will reveal to you a part of your important mission on this earth. He had been waiting for this moment for so long. The moment when the voice would tell him about the great mission. And the voice revealed it. It turned out that Estefanio must guide girls onto the righteous path, convey to them that loose behavior is dangerous, sinful, and repulsive. He must explain that if they continue to behave this way, it will be too late to change anything. If you save even one woman from sinfulness, then the mission is successfully accomplished, the voice continued. The more women you save, the better. But keep in mind, this is a challenging path. You will encounter many obstacles on it, you will have to face misunderstanding, and, of course, you will need cruelty, cold-bloodedness, and sometimes even ruthlessness. Estefanio eagerly set out to fulfill his mission and soon realized that the voice was right. Classmates to whom he tried to convey his important message ridiculed him. The boys joined in. They insulted Estefanio, laughed at him, and even pushed and kicked him. But Estefanio didn't give up. Some time passed. Estefanio finished school but refused to continue his education. He wasn't accepted into the army due to his diagnosis. Now, he spent his days sitting at home, locked in his room, listening to the voice that gave him important advice. You acted with sincere desire and commendable zeal. And I didn't interfere, I wanted you to see for yourself. Words alone won't do, you need to be firmer, more determined. Your mission is not an easy one. Act with force. For some girls, the only path to salvation is temporary isolation from society. You need to prepare thoroughly. And Estefanio found a part-time job, he needed money. From morning until evening, he hovered around large grocery stores, helping the loaders for a token fee. His father was pleased, finally, his son had come to his senses. Yes, Estefanio had disability benefits due to his diagnosis, but it was hard for his father to see the grown child sitting in his room all day long. He had hands, legs, and plenty of strength, so he wanted his son to work at least in this way. Soon, Estefanio realized that the loader's assistants earned meager wages, and he needed a lot of money. He found a way to achieve what he wanted. It turned out that most people were excessively trusting, leaving their bags, jackets, and wallets in plain sight. Estefanio calmly took money and cards from such unsuspecting individuals. After all, he did it not for himself, but for the common good. On a warm June day, when no trouble seemed imminent, his grandmother suddenly passed away. Her heart had been giving her trouble for a while, but the old lady couldn't manage to reach a doctor. Estefanio was the one who had been constantly going to specialists, hoping for her condition to improve. The young man grieved much more deeply than his parents did at the time. His grandmother was the only person who cared about him. Although the old woman didn't fully understand him, considering the voice in his head was a product of his vivid imagination, she loved Estefanio and took care of him. His parents, on the other hand, were always ashamed of their defective child and tried to have as little contact with him as possible. Well, Estefanio already had enough money to start a new life. He left for a village in the neighboring region. It was a dying village. The young ones left for the city, while the elderly spent their days here. It was quiet and peaceful. There were no nearby neighbors, just what he needed. Moreover, houses here were almost given away for free. His parents didn't oppose his separation. They never believed he needed help or attention. When Estefanio packed his bags and left for the village, his father and mother sighed in relief. They didn't visit him there even once, as if they had erased their son from their lives. Estefanio didn't hold any grudges against them for it. It even suited him that they didn't control him. Now he would fully unfold his potential and undertake his mission. First, he set up a room for those he would save, as the voice advised him to do. Estefanio renovated the basement. He installed a sturdy door, lined the walls and ceiling with soundproofing material, found basic furniture, and arranged for electricity. He also bought a camera that he placed in a corner. The lens captured the entire room, just what was needed. Several speakers were hung from the ceiling. The voice warned that initially, the women in need of rescue would be aggressive and even dangerous. It would be better to interact with them from a distance, hence the need for speakers and a microphone. Furthermore, Estefanio learned to drive a car. The voice said that this skill would facilitate his mission. Of course, with his diagnosis, he wouldn't have been granted a driver's license, but he didn't need one. He found an old, rusty car without wheels in one of the abandoned houses. Estefanio had to learn a lot. He watched numerous internet videos about the mechanics of automobiles. It turned out that things weren't so complicated. Over time, he acquired the necessary spare parts, and, voila, he had his own car. Estefanio drove it along country roads, honing his driving skills. Thorough preparation took several years. Estefanio worked unhurriedly and eagerly, feeling that he was doing everything right. The voice now rarely fell silent. It gave advice, guidance, and encouragement. And finally, the time came. Estefanio headed to the city. The voice directed him to a nightclub where the youth liked to gather. It was a beautiful building with a wide porch. From the inside, the not-so-melodious music could be faintly heard. The youth crowded the staircase. The girls were dressed in outfits that revealed more than they concealed. They were blatantly flirting with the boys, laughing immodestly. Estefanio's heart clenched. The voice was right. The world was truly in great danger if very young individuals behaved this way. That night, Estefanio tried to take one of these wanton girls with him. A prepared room awaited her, soul-saving conversations. She needed to reevaluate her behavior and worldview before it was too late. She was an audacious, red-haired girl of 18. There shouldn't have been any problems with her. She was clearly drunk and didn't understand much. Estefanio took her by the hand and led her to his car, but he was stopped. The guys from the red-haired girls group noticed that an unfamiliar man was taking their friend away. Without hesitation, they pounced on Estefanio and beat him. He learned a lesson from this situation and understood that he needed to act more subtly. The next time, he entered the club as a regular visitor, blending into the crowd, finding an observational spot, and beginning to examine the establishment's guests. He was interested in those who were alone and weren't being watched by anyone. Elisa immediately stood out from the crowd. Amid the dancing youth, she looked like a white raven. Firstly, she was a bit older, seemingly Estefanio's contemporary. Secondly, the woman was too openly eyeing the guys and even initiating contact with them. Yet, despite her efforts, she wasn't successful in gaining the man's attention, even though she tried hard. Estefanio mentally posed the question to the voice. Is this woman the one? Is she the future of the girls who weren't saved in time? Will they become like her? As a possibility, yes, the voice promptly responded, but I think there's still hope for this woman. She's not beyond redemption. Approach her, invite her along. It's not the most difficult task, it's what you need for practice. Approach her, invite her along. Estefanio had never interacted with women like this before. He blushed deeply, his palms became sweaty, his knees trembled, and he felt embarrassed. But he was commanded by the voice, and requests from the voice could not be ignored. So, he gathered his courage and approached the woman. Seeing that someone was finally interested in her, the woman broke into a smile. Estefanio noticed that her teeth were stained with bright red lipstick, generously applied to her lips. Elisa seemed to be craving male attention more than anything else in the world. She tried to charm Estefanio, occasionally tugging at her skirt to draw his attention to her thighs. She also looked at him with admiration and complimented him. Even Estefanio's head spun from the rush of emotions. The voice managed to restore his self-control and remind him that he wasn't here for entertainment but for an important mission. Elisa didn't need any convincing. She herself volunteered to leave with Estefanio. His rusty car and his living conditions didn't faze her. What mattered to her was feeling liked by someone. Back at his place, sitting on the worn-out couch in the kitchen, Elisa opened up. It turned out she had a strict father. He prohibited his daughter from wearing makeup, dressing provocatively, and, of course, interacting with boys. For the slightest disobedience, he punished the girl with a belt. Elisa's mother didn't oppose such methods of upbringing. She was a pale shadow of her husband, obedient to his every word. Estefanio expressed admiration for Elisa's father, believing that's how a man should be. He wanted to meet this man, to which Elisa responded that her father had recently passed away, which prompted her to hastily catch up on what she had missed, to do everything her strict father had forbidden during his lifetime. Elisa started dressing provocatively, wearing bright makeup, and going to clubs and bars. She never really made any close friends her age. Her father said they only brought trouble, so Elisa embarked on her adventures in complete solitude. But evidently, time had been missed. Pretty, young girls were popular, and Elisa resented them with all her heart for their youth and freshness. Occasionally, some male attentions fell her way as well. "What do you do for a living?" Estefanio inquired. It turned out, nothing. Just like him, Elisa had a disability and the same diagnosis. This fact pleased Estefanio. He saw a kindred soul in Elisa. She didn't need to be saved, she just needed a bit of love and attention. And also, she could become his faithful assistant. Estefanio felt that he could confide everything in Elisa, so he told her about the voice, his uniqueness, and the higher mission entrusted to him. The woman hung on to every word, her eyes burning with genuine admiration. She herself suggested becoming his right-hand woman on his grand journey. When he agreed, she even cried tears of joy. Since then, Elisa and Estefanio have been inseparable. The man was happy. Finally, there was someone who supported and understood him. He didn't need to hide anything from Elisa, she fully shared all his views. Moreover, just like his grandmother once did, Elisa took care of Estefanio, pouring him coffee, making pastries and pancakes, and cooking aromatic borscht. It turned out that he had been missing a lot of this. Elisa didn't need saving, on the contrary, she could become a support in the mission of rescuing young souls. Her provocative appearance and loose behavior were just a way to elicit a bit of love from those around her. But nobody understood her, just like Estefanio, they were two against the world. Now Elisa looked completely different. She wore long dresses, didn't wear makeup, and tied her hair neatly in a ponytail. Estefanio liked her this way much more. They often discussed plans to rescue young girls from the corrupting influence of this world, worked out the details, and talked about possible scenarios. And one day, they finally managed to lure one of the naive young girls into the basement. It was Valeriana, a teenage girl who had come to the bar to have fun. The pretty, slender girl had gotten used to men paying attention to her. They were willing to pay for her food and drinks, take Valeriana for rides in cars around the city at night. Of course, everything came at a price, something Valeriana had learned quite well by the age of 16. The girl didn't object, everything had its price. Home life wasn't easy for Valeriana. Her mother raised her alone. Well, raised might be an overstatement. She provided her with food, and that was about it. Her mother enjoyed a carefree lifestyle. Her small apartment was always crowded with friends and acquaintances. They drank, argued, laughed, fought, and occasionally even had physical altercations. Valeriana dreamed of something more. She considered herself worthy of a better life, not one spent in cramped apartments. Valeriana had a model-like appearance, and she believed she could attract the attention of more successful men. She wasn't going to miss her chance. Valeriana was quite content with her life. Youth and beauty were her ticket, allowing her to quickly get what she wanted. But one day, Estefanio crossed her path. The strange man accosted her on the bar's porch, where she had gone to smoke. He spoke about her impious behavior, the impending dangers to her soul. Valeriana didn't pay much attention, which was a mistake because she might have suspected something was wrong and escaped in time. Someone hit her on the back of her head from behind, her vision darkened, and the ground slipped from under her feet. Valeriana probably remained unconscious for a while. Most likely, she was drugged, as she woke up with a strange smell in her nose. She found herself in the basement. She screamed, pounded on the door and walls, and begged to be let go. At first, I talked to her from a distance, as the voice advised. Estefanio's eyes were slightly clouded with memories. Adela looked at him in horror, finding it hard to believe that all of this was true. Dealing with Valeriana was challenging. She struggled for a while, but eventually, things started to change. Valeriana broke, became indifferent, and apathetic to everything around her. She no longer opposed visits from Elisa and Estefanio. She hung on their every word and followed their instructions flawlessly. After a couple of years, she could even be released from the basement. Valeriana didn't attempt to escape. With Estefanio and Elisa, she found what she had been missing at home: care, love, understanding. Finally, someone cared about her. Estefanio realized that the girl was ready. He wanted to take her to a monastery near the nearest town, but Valeriana suddenly resisted and asked to stay in this house with them. Let her stay, Elisa supported the idea. She can be like a daughter to us and an assistant. It's more fun together, now we have a real family. Estefanio considered it, consulted with the voice, and agreed. Indeed, extra hands wouldn't hurt in a rural house. Soon, the voice said it was time to move forward. Everything went well with Valeriana. Congratulations! She's now a redeemed girl, saved from the world's filth. But how many more of them are there, these young, foolish girls in need of rescue? You can't just do nothing, the voice urged. Their next target was Adela. On that evening, Estefanio was lurking outside the bar, accompanied by his loyal assistants Elisa and Valeriana. Adela, squeezing through a narrow window onto the street, naturally couldn't escape the trio's attention. Estefanio's car followed her silently from the bar, and of course, the dark, ominous industrial zone turned out to be the perfect place to lure her into the car. Well, that's the whole story, Estefanio summed up, scrutinizing Adela closely. You're lucky. You're still very young, and I saw you in time. It's easy to save you. Let me go, the girl pleaded. I understand everything now. I won't dress like that anymore, and I'll avoid those places. This is a good lesson, really. Thank you so much for caring. I truly understand now. For a moment, Adela felt like her words were having an impact. Estefanio seemed lost and thought about something. But there's a lot of work to do with you, the man said, shaking his head. It's not as simple as you think. But it's good that you're reflecting on your behavior and trying to understand me. If things continue this way, everything will be fine. Saying this, Estefanio left the basement, leaving Adela alone with her panic and frightening thoughts about the future. Days turned into weeks. Estefanio read Adela's sermons on proper female behavior every day. Sometimes he came down to the basement himself, sometimes he spoke through the speakers. Adela tried to feign humility. If she behaved as this madman wanted, perhaps he would let her go sooner. But time passed, and nothing changed. Adela attempted to ask about her future, sometimes pleaded to be released, but always received the same response. "You're not ready," Estefanio would say. "The corrupting influence of the dirty world on you is still very strong." The voice said that much still needs to be done with you. After a while, they began bringing her food directly into the room instead of passing it through the window and the door. Sometimes it was Valeriana, but more often it was Elisa. Apparently, Adela had earned the trust of her captors. Adela tried to appeal to the girl and the woman, attempted to sway them to her side, and begged to be released quietly, out of Estefanio's sight. But it was all in vain. Valeriana remained indifferent, like a zombie or mannequin. It seemed the bizarre couple had thoroughly warped her mind. Elisa reported everything to Estefanio, and he redoubled his efforts to guide the lost soul. Sometimes the man punished Adela, striking her with rods a couple of times right on her back. It was very painful, terrifying, and hurtful. He often withheld lunch or dinner. But the most difficult part was the complete isolation. For particularly grave offenses, according to Estefanio, Adela would be left in complete darkness and silence for a while. She was ready to do anything, just to see the light again and hear someone's voice. Once, Adela almost managed to escape. This happened after she had behaved quietly and humbly for a long time, copying Valeriana's behavior. Estefanio's vigilance had slightly waned, and he had started sending the named daughter to the basement. Valeriana would bring food, take away dirty dishes, and provide a bucket of water and a cloth for cleaning. During one of these visits, Adela pushed Valeriana with all her strength. The girl fell to the ground, hit her head, and didn't even attempt to stand up. With her usual indifference, she watched Adela escape into the open passage. The girl found herself in a damp, dark basement cluttered with junk. A narrow staircase led upward. A square opening in the ceiling revealed sunlight. Adela hadn't seen it in so long. Quickly, towards it, towards fresh air, towards freedom. Energy surged within Adela out of nowhere. She rushed up the stairs and was a bit disoriented upon reaching a spacious, sparsely furnished room. She looked out the window and saw an overgrown garden. It was summer outside, the sun shone brightly in the blue sky, and fluffy clouds lazily drifted in the distance. And the air was wonderful here. But there was no time to hesitate. Adela rushed to find a way out. Her heart was pounding furiously. Just to make it in time, just to break free. But, of course, she couldn't succeed. A moment later, the enraged Estefanio burst into the room. He grabbed the girl and dragged her back into the darkness of the damp basement, away from the sun, the blue sky, and the big and incredibly beautiful world. He punished her and Valeriana too. He lashed both of them with flexible rods. Adela screamed, insulted her tormentor, and tried to bite him or at least kick him. Valeriana, on the other hand, endured it in silence. Days once again passed as usual. Adela felt like she was losing her mind. She didn't know how to fill the hours in the cramped basement. Estefanio didn't give her books, didn't bring the sketchbook with pencils, even though the girl begged him for it. The days dragged on incredibly slowly. Adela's only distractions were cleaning, mealtimes, and Estefanio's tedious, delusional sermons. Adela often imagined that everything happening to her was just a terrible dream. She only needed to wake up, and instead of the tiresome, cursed basement interior, she would see her beloved room, hear her mom calling her for breakfast, and smell the familiar scents of her home. But time went on, and the miracle never happened. One day, a man brought a huge steaming pot into the basement, immediately filling the room with an incomparable aroma of raspberry jam. Elisa followed with a large sack on her shoulders, containing glass jars and metal lids. Therapeutic labor, Estefanio explained. You'll help us, so you don't waste your energy. We have a business, added Elisa. Valeriana gathers raspberries in the forest, I make jam, and Estefanio will sell it on the road. There's a busy highway nearby, and people from the city drive back and forth in their cars. There's a high demand for such natural products. And you will fill the jars with jam and screw on the lids. Adela eagerly took on the work. At least labor provided some distraction from the horrific reality, helped cope with numerous fears and anxieties, and in the process, she could indulge in the delicious and aromatic jam. Elisa made jam from various forest berries, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, and currants. It seemed like the trade was thriving. Estefanio was clearly scaling up production. Adela still remembered the day when she accidentally noticed a scratch on the inside of one of the lids. Something clicked in her mind. She realized she could do something to save herself. She could reach out to the outside world, ask for help. She decided to act immediately. She found a sharp stone on the floor, presumably brought in on someone's shoe, and used it to scratch a message directly onto the lid. She briefly described everything that had happened to her as best she could and indicated her location. From Estefanio and Elisa's conversations, Adela understood she was in some semi-abandoned village away from the highway. Adela assessed the result of her efforts. The words of the message were easy to overlook. If you didn't scrutinize them, they looked like scratches on an old lid. But still, there was a chance. On that day, Adela managed to take 6 such notes. She worked quickly, knowing that someone might be watching her. She couldn't raise suspicion. But when Estefanio appeared after some time, he behaved as usual, even praised Adela for her work. Apparently, if he was watching her, he didn't notice anything. The next day, Adela realized that the saving thought had come to her just in time. The berry season had ended, and this was the last batch of jam. The girl had managed to send a total of 6 messages out into the world. Now all that was left was to wait and hope. Adela lay on the hard cot, waiting to get up and thinking about her unfortunate fate. How unlucky she was to get caught up in such a situation. Hopefully, someone would notice her pleas for help on the lid soon. Or perhaps these jars hadn't been sold yet. Were they just sitting in the basement? Or, worse, had Estefanio decided to keep the jam from the last batch for their own consumption? She didn't want to think about what might happen if he noticed the inscriptions. Loud and lively music poured out of the speakers, and the basement was flooded with bright, blinding light. It was time to get up, wash up, and start another dull, joyless day. Job was driving down the empty highway, carefully watching the road. Early autumn had started, and the trees stretching on both sides of the road were already beginning to turn yellow. It was such a beautiful time of year. He was returning home from a business trip. He had been tasked with finalizing a contract with the director of a small factory in a provincial town, and Job had excelled, negotiating favorable terms for his boss. The boss would be pleased, and surely he would reward Job with a well-deserved bonus. Suddenly, in the distance, Job noticed something dark. There was someone on the roadside. As he got closer, he saw a man of slender build. He was sitting on a folding chair, the kind fishermen use, with plump jars of raspberry and seemingly blueberry jam spread out on a blanket in front of him. It was clear what was going on. A local resident had embarked on the simple business of selling homemade preserves. Job just couldn't drive past. Memories of his grandmother's cozy, warm house and her pancakes with raspberry jam came rushing back. What a time it was! The price was extremely low, and Job purchased several wonderful jars from the man. He decided he would definitely buy some pancakes from a supermarket on the way. It wouldn't be his grandmother's baking, of course, but it's still better than nothing. In the evening, his ex-wife, with whom Job had divorced 2 years ago, came over with their son. Here, let him stay with you tonight. I need to go to a friend's for my birthday, and I have nowhere to leave him. Although he had planned to rest after the journey, Job was delighted with this turn of events. He had missed his 5-year-old son David a lot, and they hadn't been seeing each other as often as he would have liked. Job had become a father very early, while still a third-year student, and he had never regretted it. Initially, father and son watched cartoons together, then played with building blocks for a while, and finally, it was time for dinner. Job took out the store-bought pancakes and a jar of jam he had bought the previous day. He poured coffee for himself and his son. It felt so cozy to sit at the table in the living room, chatting about everything and savoring the pancakes with the delicious raspberry jam. David kept fidgeting in his chair, wanting to run off somewhere, and he seemed somewhat nervous, fiddling with something in his hands, sniffing, blinking rapidly. Job started thinking about showing his son to a neurologist. Perhaps the little one was still upset about his parents' separation. Such a poor thing. After dinner, Job was washing the dishes, while David was playing on the table, staging a small battle with the cutlery. Spoons fought against forks, other pieces of cutlery served as tanks and covers. "Help me, they've captured me," David pronounced slowly. At first, Job thought it was just part of his son's game. "Dad, what does it mean when men are captured? Is it like in movies when they take people away?" Job turned around. David was examining the lid of the jam jar with interest. Job approached closer and only then noticed the scratched words on the back of the lid. If it weren't for his son, he might not have paid any attention to them. His heart raced furiously. Job felt a rush of heat. What was this? Was it a joke? Or was it a genuine plea for help? And what should he do? Should he urgently call the police? Or forget about it and carry on with his life calmly? Heavy thoughts troubled Job. He tossed and turned all night. On the one hand, there was so much desperation, hope, and pleas in that message. On the other hand, maybe it was just a prank, possibly by the jam seller's sons or their friends. Yet by morning, Job decided to take his discovery to the police and let them decide what to do with it. Adela, as often happened, opened her eyes before the alarm started. She was laying on the cot and trying to imagine her parents and their life. How had they coped with the disappearance of their only beloved child? Had they truly lost hope and stopped searching? What are they doing now? Adela missed her mom and dad so much, just thinking about them squeezed her heart painfully and brought tears to her eyes. When her parents were around, all problems seemed insignificant. She could hide from any troubles in her mother's warm embrace and behind her father's protective back. But now she had to deal with everything on her own. Suddenly, a noise came from outside the door. The loud bangs made the basement shake. Adela jumped on the cot, pressed her back against the wall, and hugged her knees. Something was happening. A few more muffled thuds, and a crowd of people stormed into the room. It was hard to make out any details, the light wasn't on yet. Beams from handheld spotlights explored the walls and ceiling of the basement. In these circles of light, Adela caught glimpses of men's faces, camouflage uniforms. "You came for me." Adela finally understood what was happening. She could hardly believe her luck. For so many years, she had tried to convince herself that what had happened to her was just a terrible dream, and now, on the contrary, she feared that men in uniforms were just part of her dreams. One of the men draped a blanket over her shoulders and, gently holding her by the shoulders, led her towards the exit. Adela found herself in the very same room where she had managed to escape about a year and a half ago. Chaos reigned here now. Items were scattered on the floor, and furniture was overturned. Adela looked around, both fearing and hoping to see Estefanio, Elisa, Valeriana, or perhaps all three at once. But they weren't there. People in camouflage and plain clothes roamed around the house, taking photos, jotting things down in notebooks, quietly conversing, and seemingly gathering evidence. Adela walked to the door, her legs were shackling. It was wide open, allowing the fresh wind to rush in. She was crying, yet she didn't even notice. What a joy it was to see this vast and beautiful world again, especially after almost giving up hope of rescue. Outside the gate, there were many vehicles, some with flashing lights on top. People in uniforms and civilians alike were crowded around. Despite the early hour, they had gathered to witness this extraordinary sight, along with the few residents of the village. Mostly elderly folks. Adela was led to an ambulance. "How are you feeling?" a woman in a white coat asked. "Wonderful," Adela smiled. "Just wonderful. I haven't felt this good in a long time." The doctor shook her head and said that Adela should still go to the hospital with them. Adela didn't object. Anywhere was better, as long as it was with people, as long as it was far away from this dreadful place. As Adela was getting into the car, a man approached her. He was handsome, tall, and had concerned dark eyes framed by thick eyelashes. "I'm Job," he introduced himself. "I'm the one who found your message on the lid of the jam jar. Tell me, how are you? Did the help arrive in time?" "Thank you so much." Adela felt tears welling up in her eyes again. "If it weren't for you. Thank you for informing the police." "At first, they didn't take my words seriously," Job admitted. "They thought maybe my son played a prank. He's only 5 and can barely read, you know? I had to involve some acquaintances. I'm just glad we made it in time. I was afraid that, well, that help might be too late." "Thank you." Adela didn't know how to express her gratitude to this person. She wanted to say something more, something important, but a policeman arrived and separated Job from her. Nevertheless, they did meet again. Job visited Adela in the hospital. Not right away, of course. At first, no one was allowed to see her except her parents, who initially lived in her room, refusing to part with their daughter, who had miraculously returned. They had already lost all hope of seeing Adela alive, and then came such a miracle. Meanwhile, Adela could only communicate with her friend Celestina over the phone. Celestina cried on the other end. It turns out that all these years she had blamed herself for inviting Adela to the party and not giving her a ride home after her shift. Celestina lived with an overwhelming sense of guilt, even seeking help from psychologists. Adela's return became her salvation and immense joy. But time passed, emotions settled down, and life gradually returned to normal. Adela was still in the hospital, where they had identified minor health issues caused by the poor and monotonous diet, as well as the lack of fresh air. There were also understandable nervous system problems, but Adela was recovering. The trial of the criminal couple proceeded relatively quickly. Estefanio and Elisa were deemed dangerous to society by experts and were sent to a closed medical institution. They were to receive lifelong treatment. Valeriana, on the other hand, was recognized as a victim and was also sent for treatment. Adela was told that Valeriana had good prospects, she would recover and be able to lead a normal young woman's life. Although for now, Valeriana missed Estefanio and Elisa, and refused to meet with her biological mother, who turned out to be quite different from the drinking and party-loving person Estefanio had described. Just an ordinary, lonely woman, struggling to raise her daughter on her own. All these years she had suffered, tried to find Valeriana, and hired private detectives with her last bit of money. Adela didn't expect to see Job in the hospital. His visit brought her a lot of joy. He offered help, inquired about Adela's well-being, and genuinely wanted to support her. He didn't ask about the time she spent in the basement, he was afraid of hurting her. Adela looked at him and hoped that this sincere, kind person would invite her to the movies after she was discharged or simply take a walk in the park. Next to him, she felt completely safe, and she didn't want to part with Job. It turned out that Adela had spent more than 3 years in that dark, confined basement. She had missed so much, she needed to catch up.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.